In the world of YouTube, where ghost hunts and paranormal investigations draw millions of viewers, three friends, Eli, Max, and Jenna, had carved out a niche for themselves. Their channel, Mythbreakers, was dedicated to debunking myths about haunted houses and proving that most supernatural occurrences could be explained rationally. Over the years, they had visited numerous so-called haunted locations, always emerging unscathed and with another debunked story for their audience. But their latest episode would be different. Their destination was the infamous Lalaurie Mansion in New Orleans, Louisiana. The mansion had a gruesome history dating back to the early 1800s when its owner, Madame Delphine Lalaurie, was exposed as a cruel slave owner who tortured and killed those under her care. The mansion was said to be one of the most haunted places in America, with countless reports of ghostly apparitions, disembodied screams, and other terrifying phenomena. Eli, the leader of the group, was excited as they arrived at the mansion just before sunset. "This place has a reputation, but we're here to show there's nothing to be afraid of," he said confidently, setting up his camera. Max, the tech-savvy one, began unpacking their equipment, while Jenna, the skeptic, took in the ominous appearance of the mansion. "I've heard the stories, but it's just another old house. We'll be out of here in a few hours with nothing to show but some creaky floorboards and dusty rooms." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the mansion's facade, the trio prepared to enter. Their plan was simple: explore each floor, capture any strange occurrences on camera, and debunk them. They had done this countless times before, and they were confident this would be no different. The air inside the mansion was thick with dust and the scent of decay. The wooden floorboards creaked beneath their feet as they made their way through the grand foyer, the sound echoing eerily in the empty space. They began their investigation in the parlor, where many reported hearing soft piano music late at night. Max set up his EVP recorder on an old out-of-tune piano in the corner. "If there's anyone here, make yourself known," he called out, more out of habit than expectation. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then the piano keys began to depress on their own, playing a haunting melody. Jenna immediately moved to the piano, inspecting the keys. "There's got to be an explanation for this. Maybe a draft or something." But there was no draft, and the air was still. The melody stopped as suddenly as it had begun, leaving an unsettling silence in its wake. They continued to the grand staircase, where many visitors claimed to have seen ghostly figures ascending and descending. As they climbed the stairs, the temperature dropped noticeably. Their breath became visible in the cold air, and the hairs on the back of Jenna's neck stood on end. "Eli, are you feeling this?" Jenna asked, her voice shaky. "Yeah, but it's just an old house. Temperature fluctuations are common," Eli replied, though he sounded less sure than usual. As they reached the top of the stairs, a loud bang echoed through the mansion, coming from one of the rooms down the hall. Max checked the time on his camera. "We're getting some great footage here. Let's check it out." They cautiously approached the source of the noise, the master bedroom, where Madame Lalaurie herself was said to have committed her heinous acts. The door creaked open as they pushed it, revealing a room that looked frozen in time. A large four-poster bed dominated the space, its once luxurious curtains now tattered and gray with age. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind them, locking them inside. Jenna rushed to the door, pulling at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Panic began to set in as the room grew darker, the shadows seeming to stretch and grow. "Max, "Get the door open," Eli shouted, his voice betraying his fear. Max fumbled with his tools, trying to force the lock, but to no avail. The temperature continued to drop, and the room felt like it was closing in around them. Then from the darkness, they heard it, whispers, low and unintelligible, growing louder with each passing second. The whispers turned into screams, horrific, blood-curdling screams that seemed to come from all directions at once. The walls shook violently, and the bed in the center of the room began to levitate, twisting in the air as if caught in an invisible storm. "Eli, what's happening?" Jenna screamed, backing away from the bed. "I don't know. This wasn't supposed to happen," Eli yelled, frantically searching for a way out. Suddenly, the bed crashed back to the floor, splintering into pieces. The screaming stopped, replaced by an oppressive silence that pressed down on them. In the dim light, they could see something moving in the shadows. A figure, tall and thin, with eyes that glowed like embers. "Run!" Eli shouted, but there was nowhere to go. The figure stepped closer, its presence suffocating. Max's camera captured every horrifying detail: the pale, twisted face, the long, skeletal fingers reaching out towards them. They huddled together, paralyzed with fear as the figure loomed over them. Just as the figure was about to touch them, the door burst open and the cold air rushed out of the room as if the mansion itself was exhaling. They didn't wait to see what would happen next. The trio bolted from the room, down the stairs, and out the front door, not stopping until they were well away from the mansion. They sat in silence on the curb outside, gasping for breath, their hearts still racing. The once confident and rational myth-breakers were shaken to their core, unable to explain what they had just experienced. Eli looked at Max, who was reviewing the footage on his camera. "Did you get all of that?" Max nodded, his hands trembling as he played back the video. The footage was clear, too clear. The figure, the levitating bed, the screams. It was all there, undeniable proof that something was horribly wrong with Ravenwood Manor. "Are we going to post this?" Jenna asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Eli shook his head, his face pale. "No, some things are better left unseen. We'll tell our viewers that the footage was corrupted. This can't go public." They left New Orleans the next day, each of them haunted by the memories of what had happened. The Mythbreakers never returned to the mansion, and their channel slowly faded away as they refused to investigate any more haunted locations. But the video, though never released, remained on Max's hard drive, a constant reminder of the night they came face to face with something beyond their understanding. And though they never spoke of it again, they knew that what they had experienced was no myth. The Lalaurie Mansion was a place of true horror, and they had barely escaped with their lives. In the heart of Savannah, Georgia, where history lingers in the air and the past seems never far away, stood Ravenwood Manor. The house was a relic from the 1800s, nestled on the outskirts of the historic district. Its crumbling facade and overgrown garden were enough to send shivers down the spine of anyone who dared to walk by. But to a group of local teenagers, Chloe, Ethan, Maya, and Jake, it was the perfect spot for a late-night dare. The legend of Ravenwood Manor was well known in Savannah. It was said that the original owner, a wealthy cotton merchant named Charles Wentworth, had gone mad after his family perished in a mysterious fire. He locked himself inside the house and was never seen again. Some say his spirit still roams the halls, searching for his lost family, while others believe that something far more sinister lurks within. One crisp October evening, the four friends decided to put the rumors to the test. Chloe, always the fearless leader, convinced the others to spend the night in the house. "It's just a bunch of old stories," she said, standing in front of the wrought iron gate that led to the manor. "We'll stay until dawn, take some photos, and be out before anyone even knows we were here." Ethan, who was more skeptical, hesitated. "I don't know, Chloe. This place gives me the creeps." "Don't be a chicken," Jake teased, nudging him. "It's just a house. What's the worst that could happen?" Maya, the quietest of the group, shivered as she looked up at the darkened windows. "Let's just get this over with." The gate creaked open, and the group made their way up the overgrown path to the front door. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and decay. The door, like a gaping mouth, groaned as Chloe pushed it open, revealing the darkness inside. Armed with only their phones for light, they stepped into the grand foyer. The floorboards creaked underfoot, and the walls seemed to close in around them. Dust hung in the air like a fog, and the silence was suffocating. "Let's split up," Chloe suggested, her voice echoing through the empty house. "We'll cover more ground that way." The others reluctantly agreed. Chloe and Jake headed upstairs, while Ethan and Maya explored the ground floor. As they ventured deeper into the house, the atmosphere grew heavier, and the temperature seemed to drop with every step. Chloe and Jake made their way up the grand staircase, their footsteps echoing through the empty halls. The upper floor was even darker than the rest of the house, the shadows longer and deeper. They entered what appeared to be the master bedroom, the bed still made, as if waiting for someone to return. Jake shone his phone's flashlight around the room, illuminating a large, cracked mirror on the wall. "Creepy," he muttered. Chloe, undeterred, approached the mirror. As she did, a cold draft swept through the room, and the door slammed shut behind them. Jake jumped, his heart racing. "What the hell?" Chloe tried the door, but it wouldn't budge. "It's just stuck," she said, though her voice wavered. But then, in the mirror, she noticed something strange. Her reflection wasn't moving. It stood still, staring back at her with cold, empty eyes. "Jake," Chloe whispered, fear creeping into her voice. "Look at the mirror." Jake turned and froze. The reflections were all wrong, distorted, twisted, as if the mirror was showing them something they weren't supposed to see. And then, without warning, the reflection of Chloe smiled, a sinister, unnatural grin that sent chills down her spine. "Get us out of here!" Chloe screamed, pounding on the door. Meanwhile, Ethan and Maya were exploring the ground floor, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling that something was watching them. They found a door leading to the basement, and against their better judgment, decided to check it out. The basement was cold and damp, the air thick with the smell of mold. The stairs creaked ominously as they descended, and the darkness seemed to swallow them whole. Ethan's flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. "This place is a nightmare," Maya whispered, clutching Ethan's arm. They reached the bottom of the stairs and found themselves in a large open space filled with old furniture covered in dusty sheets. But something else caught their attention, an old rotting door at the far end of the room. Ethan hesitated. "Maybe we shouldn't," but before he could finish, the door slowly creaked open on its own. A foul stench wafted out, and from the darkness beyond, they heard a faint rhythmic tapping, like the sound of fingernails on wood. "Let's get out of here," Maya said, backing away. But as they turned to leave, the basement door slammed shut behind them, trapping them in the darkness. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, and a cold wind blew through the room, extinguishing their flashlights. Upstairs, Chloe and Jake were in a full-blown panic. The door to the bedroom remained stubbornly closed, and the mirror seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The sinister smile on Chloe's reflection widened, and suddenly, the glass began to crack. "We need to get out of here," Jake shouted, grabbing Chloe's arm, but the house wasn't done with them yet. As they tried to force the door open, the walls began to close in, the air growing thick with the smell of smoke. Chloe could hear faint whispers, voices from another time, pleading, crying for help. Downstairs, Ethan and Maya were desperately searching for another exit. The tapping had stopped, but the oppressive silence that followed was even worse. And then, from the shadows, they saw it, glowing red eyes, staring at them from the far corner of the room. They didn't wait to see what it was. They bolted up the stairs, pounding on the door, but it wouldn't open. Ethan threw his weight against it, and with a final, desperate push, the door flew open and they stumbled into the hallway. At the same moment, Chloe and Jake burst out of the bedroom, their faces pale with terror. "We need to get out, now!" Chloe yelled. The four of them raced down the hallway towards the front door, but the house seemed to stretch on endlessly, the walls warping and twisting, as if trying to trap them inside. Finally, they reached the door and threw it open, spilling out onto the front lawn. They didn't stop running until they were back on the street, the safety of the city lights a comforting sight. Panting and shaken, they looked back at Ravenwood Manor, its dark silhouette looming over them. The house was silent once more, as if nothing had happened. But they knew better. They had felt its malevolent presence, its hunger for something more than just fear. "Let's never talk about this again," Ethan said, his voice trembling. The others nodded in agreement, too shaken to argue. As they walked away, the house stood quietly behind them, waiting for the next group of thrill seekers who dared to challenge its dark secrets. San Francisco, known for its iconic landmarks and vibrant streets, hides a darker side in the shadows of its historic neighborhoods. Among these shadows lies the infamous Fairmont House, a grand Victorian mansion on Nob Hill. Abandoned for decades, the house has long been a subject of local lore, its eerie reputation growing with each passing year. One foggy evening, a group of 5 friends, Jason, Emily, Max, Rachel, and Luke, decided to test their courage and explore the notorious Fairmont House. The mansion had always fascinated them, its dark, towering silhouette looming over the city, daring anyone brave enough to step inside. They had heard the stories, but like most teenagers, they were more intrigued than scared. As the sun dipped below the horizon, they gathered outside the iron gates of the mansion. The air was thick with moisture, the fog rolling in from the bay giving the house an even more ominous aura. The gate creaked open with a sharp squeal as Jason pushed it, the sound echoing through the silent streets. "Are we really doing this?" Rachel asked, her voice tinged with nervousness. "Come on, it'll be fun," Max replied, trying to sound confident despite the chill that ran down his spine. "It's just an old house." The group made their way up the overgrown path to the front door, which hung slightly ajar. The interior was even more foreboding, with the smell of mildew and decay filling the air. Dust-covered furniture and faded wallpaper hinted at the house's former grandeur, now long forgotten. They started their exploration on the first floor, moving cautiously from room to room. The grand foyer, once a place of welcoming, now felt cold and hostile. The air grew heavier with every step, as if the house itself was alive, watching their every move. In the library, they found shelves filled with leather-bound books, many of them covered in thick layers of dust. The centerpiece of the room was an old grand piano, its surface worn and keys yellowed with age. "Do you think it still works?" Luke asked, approaching the piano with curiosity. "Only one way to find out," Jason replied, sitting down on the creaky bench. He pressed a key, and to everyone's surprise, a low, discordant note rang out, sending a shiver through the group. "Okay, that's creepy," Emily said, backing away. Suddenly, the temperature in the room plummeted, and their breath became visible in the cold air. The piano, as if possessed, began playing a slow, haunting melody on its own. The eerie tune filled the room, its notes echoing off the walls. "Let's get out of here," Rachel urged, her voice trembling. But before they could leave, the piano stopped playing, and the room fell deathly silent. The only sound was the creaking of the floorboards beneath their feet. Just as they turned to leave, the door to the library slammed shut with a deafening bang, trapping them inside. Panic set in as the group frantically tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. The walls seemed to close in on them, and they could hear a faint whispering sound, growing louder and more sinister with each passing second. "What's happening?" Emily cried, tears streaming down her face. "Everyone stay calm," Jason shouted, though his own fear was evident in his voice. "We need to find another way out." The whispering grew into a guttural growl that resonated through the room, as if something malevolent was lurking just out of sight. The air grew colder, the oppressive atmosphere suffocating them. In a desperate attempt to escape, Luke grabbed a heavy book from the shelf and hurled it at one of the windows. The glass shattered, and a gust of icy wind rushed in. One by one, they climbed through the broken window, their hands and arms bleeding from the shards of glass. They ran as fast as they could, not stopping until they were far away from the house, their hearts pounding and their breaths coming in ragged gasps. They collapsed onto the cold pavement, the mansion looming ominously in the distance. "What the hell was that?" Max whispered, his voice barely audible. "I don't know," Jason replied, shaking his head. "But we're never going back there." As they sat there, the sound of a piano playing, a mournful tune drifted through the night air, coming from the direction of the Fairmont house. It was a chilling reminder of the terror they had just escaped. They never spoke of that night again, but the memory of the haunted house would stay with them forever, a dark shadow in the back of their minds. And the Fairmont house continued to stand, silent and foreboding, waiting for the next group of curious souls to challenge its sinister secrets.